At my husband's funeral, the air was thick with mourning, yet the coffin before me was nothing but an empty box. His body was never found. My grief was hollow, sharp, unanchored, until my phone buzzed and a message stole the breath from my lungs. I'm alive. I'm not in the coffin. Don't trust the children. In that instant, what should have been an ending turned to terror, and the funeral became the beginning of a darker truth that no one could have predicted. If you are watching this, don't forget to like, share, and comment where you are watching from. I want to see how far my story of betrayal has traveled. My husband Christopher was supposed to be dead. Drowned, body never recovered. The funeral had just ended. I'd watched them lower an empty casket into the ground. But this text, it changed everything, because what came next proved the impossible. Christopher was alive, and my own children had tried to murder him. The reality of those words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe. Before I tell you how I discovered the truth that shattered my world, please hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. You won't believe what happens next. Let me back up 3 weeks. Christopher had taken our children, Betty, 28, and Leo, 25, out cruising on his yacht. He called it a family bonding day. My husband had been worried about how distant they'd become, how cold. He thought time on the water, just the 3 of them, might bridge whatever gap had formed between them. He was excited that morning, hopeful. He kissed me goodbye and promised we'd all have dinner together when they got back. That was the last normal moment I had. They returned alone. Betty's mascara was smudged, but her eyes were dry. Leo's voice shook when he told me what happened, but something felt rehearsed about it. They said Christopher had been standing at the rail, lost his balance, fell overboard. They claimed they searched for hours, called the Coast Guard, dove into the water themselves looking for him. But his body was never found. The authorities told me drownings in open water often end this way. The currents, they said, the depth. It wasn't unusual for a body to simply disappear. I wanted to believe them. I needed to believe them. Because the alternative, that my children were lying, was unthinkable. So I pushed down the uneasy feeling gnawing at my gut. I planned a funeral for an empty casket, but standing at that funeral, I felt something was wrong. The air itself felt off, charged with something I couldn't name. My mother's instinct screamed that this wasn't grief I was witnessing. It was something else entirely. I watched Betty throughout the service. She wore designer black, a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She checked her phone constantly, and once, I swear I saw her smirk at something on the screen. No tears, no trembling lip, just this cold, vacant expression that made her look like a stranger. This wasn't the daughter I'd raised. The Betty I knew was warm, compassionate, someone who cried at sad commercials. This woman was hollow, empty. Leo was worse. My son didn't even pretend to grieve. Before we'd left the cemetery, while other mourners were still offering their condolences, he was already in the corner with Christopher's brother, Jackson, and his business partner, Dee Taylor, discussing restructuring the company. His exact words, I heard him say it. "We need to move fast," Leo had whispered, not quite quietly enough, "before the lawyers tie everything up." Jackson had nodded, put a hand on Leo's shoulder like they were co-conspirators instead of uncle and nephew at a funeral. And Taylor, Christopher's partner of 15 years, the man we'd had over for Christmas dinner, whose kids played with our kids growing up, he'd looked almost excited. His eyes had this gleam I'd never seen before, no tears from any of them, just cold calculation, like they were businessmen closing a deal, not family members mourning a death. I felt bile rise in my throat. I felt sick, but I pushed it down, told myself I was imagining things. Grief does strange things to perception, I thought. Maybe I was projecting my own numbness onto them. Maybe they were in shock. Maybe everyone processes loss differently. I made excuses because the truth was too horrible to consider, that my children might be capable of something monstrous. But then I came home to our empty mansion. The silence was suffocating. I wandered through rooms that still smelled like Christopher, his cologne in the bedroom, his coffee in the kitchen, his leather and old books in the study. Every corner held a memory that now felt like a ghost. That's where I ended up, in his study, sitting in his chair behind his massive oak desk, surrounded by his things. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked like a heartbeat. Rain started pattering against the windows. The sound should have been soothing. Instead, it felt ominous, like the sky itself was weeping for what I was about to discover. And my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't look at it. I was exhausted, wrung out from holding myself together all day. But something made me pick it up. They betrayed me. I'm safe. Your children forged my death. My heart stopped. My first thought was, this is a sick joke. Some scammer targeting a grieving widow, someone who'd read about Christopher's death in the news and thought they could exploit my vulnerability. But then another message came through. Jenny Bird, I know you won't believe me, but I need you to trust me. I'm alive. The phone slipped in my sweaty palm. Jenny Bird. Nobody called me that. Nobody except Christopher. It was his private nickname for me, something that started on our honeymoon 30 years ago when I'd gotten irrationally excited about seeing a hummingbird outside our hotel window. He'd never called me that in front of anyone else. It was ours. Sacred. Something no one else in the world knew. My breath caught in my throat. My vision tunneled. Another message. Remember where we first kissed? Behind the magnolia tree at your parents' estate. You were wearing a yellow sundress. I told you I'd loved you since the moment I saw you trip over your own feet at the charity gala. Oh God. Oh God. Nobody knew that. We'd never told anyone the real story of our first kiss. We'd always said it happened at that gala, in front of everyone. The magnolia tree moment was private, sacred, ours alone. I felt the room spin around me. Another message. The morning before I left with the kids, you made me promise to talk to them about their entitlement. You said they were changing, becoming people you didn't recognize. You cried. I wiped your tears and promised we'd figure it out together. My vision blurred with tears. That conversation had happened in our bedroom at 6 a.m. No one else was awake. The house had been silent except for our whispered words. No one could have known. No one except Christopher. With shaking fingers I typed, "Prove it's you." My hands were trembling so badly I had to retype it twice. I held my breath, staring at the screen, waiting. The reply came within seconds. A photo loaded on my screen slowly, agonizingly, and then I saw him. Christopher. Gaunt, exhausted, his hair longer than he usually kept it, streaked with more gray, his face shadowed with stubble, dark circles under his eyes like bruises. But his eyes, those warm brown eyes I'd stared into for 30 years, they were unmistakable. Haunted, yes, filled with pain and something that looked like grief, but alive. Alive. He was holding today's newspaper. I could see the date clearly. Today, the day of his funeral, the day I'd stood over an empty casket and listened to a priest talk about a man who wasn't actually dead. He was in what looked like a cheap motel room, floral bedspread, water-stained ceiling, peeling wallpaper in the corner. Nothing like the luxury we'd always known. But he was alive. My husband was alive, which meant everything. The funeral, the sympathy cards, the flowers, the empty casket, Betty's smudged mascara, Leo's shaking voice, their story about searching for hours. All of it was a lie. A performance. A calculated, cruel deception. My children hadn't lost their father. They'd tried to murder him. And they'd looked me in the eye and lied about it. They'd let me grieve. Let me plan a funeral. Let me bury an empty box. I sat there in that study, phone clutched in my trembling hands, and felt my entire world crack open. Every assumption I'd made about my children, about my family, about reality itself. It all shattered like glass. The pieces of my life scattered, and I knew they'd never fit back together the same way. And I needed to know why. Why would my own children, the babies I'd nursed and raised and loved with every fiber of my being, want their father dead? What had turned them into monsters capable of this? What I discovered next would destroy what was left of my heart. But it would also reveal a conspiracy so calculated, so cruel, that I'd stop recognizing my own children entirely. They'd become strangers wearing familiar faces. And I'd have to make a choice. Protect them or protect the truth. Protect the lie that kept my family intact, or expose the evil that had rotted it from within. Every maternal instinct screamed to shield my babies. But they weren't babies anymore. I chose the truth. And that choice would change everything. It would cost me my children, but it would save my husband. It would destroy my family, but it would deliver justice. 10 minutes after that photo came through, my phone rang. A different number, but I knew it was him. My hands shook so badly I almost couldn't swipe to answer. When I heard his voice, rough, strained, but unmistakably Christopher's, I broke down completely. "Gina," he whispered, and I could hear him crying too. "God, Gina, I'm so sorry you had to go through this." His voice cracked on every word. I wanted to reach through the phone and hold him. "Christopher," I sobbed. "What happened? Tell me everything, please." I needed to understand. I needed to know how my children, our children, could have done something so monstrous. How had I missed the signs that they were capable of murder? He took a shaky breath. I could hear him struggling to compose himself. "Betty and Leo begged me to take them cruising," he began. "They said they wanted to reconnect, talk about the future. They seemed so earnest, Gina, so sincere." "I was thrilled," he continued, his voice thick with bitter irony. "They'd been so distant lately, so cold. I thought maybe I was finally getting my kids back. I thought we'd spend the day together, really talk, like we used to." I closed my eyes, picturing Christopher's hopeful face that morning. We left early in the morning. The water was beautiful, calm, clear. Leo was unusually chatty, asking about the business, about my plans for expansion. Betty made sandwiches, poured drinks. She seemed lighter than I'd seen her in months. The pain in his voice was unbearable. He'd trusted them completely. Once we were far from shore, miles from anyone, things changed. His voice dropped lower, harder. Leo kept me distracted, asking question after question. Betty handed me a drink. "Lemonade," she said, "freshly made." I felt my stomach turn. "I didn't suspect anything," Christopher said, voice breaking. "Why would I? They're my children." I drank it, and within minutes I started feeling strange, dizzy. My vision blurred. My limbs felt heavy. I could hear the terror creeping back into his voice. "She's a nurse," I whispered, realization dawning like ice water in my veins. "Betty knew exactly what to give you. My daughter had used her medical training to drug her own father. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. She knew exactly what would knock me out without killing me instantly," Christopher confirmed, "just enough to incapacitate me, make me weak, make me easy to—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The horror of it hung between us. As I got drowsy, as I started losing control of my body, they turned on me. His voice shook with rage and grief. They stood over me, my own children, and their faces were so cold, Gina, so empty, like they were looking at a stranger, like I meant nothing. "What did they say?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. My heart was already breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. How much more could it take? "They called me controlling," Christopher said bitterly. "Said I was a tyrant, that I wouldn't let them live their own lives, that I was standing in their way." Each word felt like a knife. Leo said, "You're worth more dead than alive, old man." Those exact words, from my son. I gasped. The cruelty of it stole my breath. This wasn't my Leo, the boy who used to climb into our bed during thunderstorms, the boy who cried when his goldfish died. Where had that child gone? I tried to speak, tried to reason with them, Christopher continued, but the drug was taking hold. My words were slurred. I could barely move. And then Leo grabbed me. His voice cracked completely. I heard him take several ragged breaths. He dragged me to the side of the yacht. I tried to fight Gina. God, I tried. But I was so weak. Betty just stood there watching. Her face was blank, emotionless, like she was watching a stranger, not her father. The image made me physically ill. "Leo shoved me overboard," Christopher said flatly. "Just pushed me into the water." I heard Betty say something about making sure to wipe down everything, about the story they'd tell, about the insurance policy. Insurance policy? What insurance policy? My mind raced. I hit the water and it was like ice, he continued, his voice distant, reliving the nightmare. The shock of it cleared my head just enough. I knew I had to fight, had to survive, because if I died you'd believe their lies. He was fighting for me, for us. I fought to stay conscious in that freezing water. His voice grew stronger, more determined. My limbs felt like lead. Everything in me wanted to just let go, sink. But I thought of you. I thought of your face when they told you I was dead. Thank God. Thank God he fought. I grabbed onto a piece of driftwood, just floating debris, but it saved my life. I held on and let the current take me. I couldn't swim, could barely keep my head above water. But I held on. I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. My Christopher, drowning, alone. I don't know how long I was in the water, he said. Time stopped meaning anything. I just focused on breathing, on holding on surviving, the strength it must have taken. The willpower. I'd never been more proud of him. A fisherman named Earl Hutchins found me on the shore the next morning, Christopher said, voice softening. Miles downstream from where they threw me in. I was unconscious, hypothermic. He thought I was dead at first. Another few minutes and he would have been. My children had almost succeeded. Earl didn't recognize me. Betty had taken my wallet, my phone, my watch, everything. There was nothing to identify me, and honestly, Gina, I looked like death. Pale, bruised, half drowned. He paused. Earl took me to his cabin. He lives off the grid. No TV, no internet. He had no idea who I was. He nursed me back to health in his cabin for 3 weeks, Christopher said. Fed me, gave me clothes, let me rest. He's a good man, Gina. A truly good man. He asked no questions, just helped. Thank God for Earl Hutchins. Thank God for his kindness. By the time I was strong enough to walk, to think clearly, I realized what had happened, Christopher said. I realized they'd staged my death, reported me drowned, and I knew they'd go after you next. Or convince you I was gone forever. They'd let me believe he was dead, let me grieve, let me suffer. Gina, Christopher said, his voice breaking completely now, I gave them everything. Every opportunity, every advantage. The best schools, the best life. How did we raise children capable of this? It was the question that haunted me too. Where had we gone wrong? I sat there listening to my husband describe his attempted murder, and all I could think was, when did my babies become monsters? When had the shift happened? When did love turn to greed? When did family become expendable? Christopher, I said firmly, rage building in my chest alongside the grief. We didn't raise monsters. We raised children. Something changed them. Someone corrupted them. And we're going to find out who. We're going to find out why. I needed answers. I needed justice. Don't confront them, Christopher warned urgently. Gina, please, don't let them know I'm alive yet. Don't let them know you know. We need proof, real evidence, something undeniable. He was right. I knew he was right. But every fiber of my being wanted to storm over and demand answers. We need to be smart about this, he continued. They're dangerous. They've already proven they're capable of murder. If they think we're onto them... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. They'd already tried to kill him once. What would stop them from trying again? I'll be careful, I promised. But Christopher, we're going to make them pay for this. We're going to expose exactly what they did. I swear it. The determination in my voice surprised even me. I was done being the naive mother who made excuses for her children. We will, Christopher said, together. But we need evidence first. Can you do that? Can you pretend everything is normal while we gather proof? It would be the hardest thing I'd ever done, looking my children in the eye knowing what they'd done. But I could do it. For Christopher, for justice. I can do it, I said. Whatever it takes. Christopher warned me not to confront them. We need proof, he said. Real evidence. He was right, but I had no idea how deep this conspiracy went, or how many people I trusted were involved in trying to destroy us. After I hung up with Christopher, I sat in the darkness of his study for hours, replaying the past 2 years in my mind. When had it started? When had my children transformed from the people I thought I knew into strangers capable of murder? The signs had been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. Betty, my daughter, my firstborn. She used to be so compassionate, worked as a nurse helping people, dedicating her life to healing. I remembered her coming home exhausted but fulfilled, telling me stories about patients she'd helped. She had her father's heart for service. At least, I thought she did. Then she started dating Reese Calloway 2 years ago, a wealthy investment banker with cold eyes and an expensive suit. From the first dinner we had with him, I didn't like him. There was something predatory about the way he talked about money, about people, about success. Family businesses are a trap, I'd heard him tell Betty once. They keep you dependent, keep you waiting for scraps from the table when you should own the whole restaurant. Betty had laughed. She'd actually laughed. Like her father building something from nothing was a joke, like our family was holding her back. She changed after that, became calculating, obsessed with inheritance. Conversations that used to be about her patients shifted to questions about the business, about Christopher's assets, about what would happen when you and Dad are gone, as if we were already dead, as if she was just waiting. I told myself it was just Reese's influence, that once they broke up, my Betty would come back. But they didn't break up, and my Betty never came back. She hardened, became someone who looked at her own parents like we were obstacles, like we were problems to be solved. Leo was different. My son was always impressionable, always looking for someone to follow. As a child, he'd shadow Christopher everywhere, wanting to be just like his dad. But somewhere along the way, admiration turned to resentment. Turned to bitterness. And I didn't see it happening. When Christopher refused to fund Leo's reckless cryptocurrency scheme last year, everything shifted. Leo had come to us with wild eyes and wilder promises, talking about being a millionaire by 30, about beating his father's success, about proving he didn't need Christopher's charity. The whole pitch made no sense. It was clearly a scam. Christopher tried to explain gently why it was a bad investment, tried to offer Leo a legitimate position in the company instead. But Leo exploded, screamed that his father was sabotaging him, that Christopher wanted to keep him under his thumb, that we didn't believe in him. He stormed out and didn't speak to us for 2 months. When he finally came back around, he was different, colder, and he was suddenly close with Christopher's brother Jackson. Uncle Jackson, who'd always been jealous of Christopher's success, who'd squandered his own inheritance, and then resented Christopher for building something lasting, who'd made snide comments at family gatherings about Christopher's luck, as if decades of hard work was just luck. Jackson filled Leo's head with poison, I see that now, told him he deserved more, that Christopher was holding him back, that the family fortune should be his to do with as he pleased, turned my son against his own father, and I didn't stop it because I thought it would blow over. The warning signs were everywhere, screaming at me. I just refused to listen. There were the secretive phone calls over the past year, Betty and Leo suddenly glued to their phones, stepping out of rooms when they rang, taking calls in their cars, whispering. When I asked about it, they'd snap at me. Tell me to stop being paranoid, stop hovering. There was the sudden closeness between Betty and Leo. They'd been rivals their entire childhood, fighting over everything, barely tolerating each other at family dinners. Then suddenly, about a year ago, they were inseparable. Whispering together, meeting for lunch, taking trips together. I thought it was beautiful. I thought they'd finally become friends. How naive I was. There were the invasive questions about Christopher's will and business holdings. At first, they were subtle, casual mentions over dinner. So, Dad, what happens to the business if something happens to you? Have you updated your will recently? Who gets what if, God forbid, something happens? I thought they were being responsible, planning for the future, but the questions became more aggressive, more demanding. Betty once cornered Christopher in his study and asked point-blank how much the company was worth. When he told her it was none of her concern, she'd gotten angry, actually angry. Told him she had a right to know her inheritance. She was 28 years old. Christopher was 62 and healthy. Why was she talking about inheritance? And Leo's rage. God, Leo's rage. He'd screamed at dinner 6 months ago, actually screamed at the table. When do we get to live? When do we get our share? His face was red, veins bulging in his neck. You're sitting on millions while we're supposed to just wait around like good little children? Christopher had stayed calm, too calm. He'd said, "You'll inherit when we're gone, Leo, not before, that's how families work." And Leo had thrown his glass against the wall, shattered it, then stormed out while Betty just sat there, watching. Not shocked, not surprised, like she'd expected it, like they'd planned it. I'd made excuses for all of it. Told Christopher they were just going through a phase, that they were frustrated with their careers, that they'd mature. I smoothed things over, kept the peace, pretended everything was fine because I couldn't face the truth, that my children were rotting from the inside, that greed had consumed them. I was blind, too focused on keeping peace. I told myself it was just youthful entitlement, that all adult children got impatient about inheritance, that it was normal, but it wasn't normal. And I didn't see the greed rotting them from inside because I didn't want to see it, because seeing it meant admitting I'd failed as a mother. Have you ever missed warning signs in people you loved? Drop a comment, I'd love to hear your story. Because I'm telling you, the guilt of missing those signs nearly destroyed me. The guilt of thinking I could have stopped this, that I could have saved them from themselves if I'd just paid attention. But I couldn't change the past. I could only control what happened next. Christopher said we needed proof. Real, undeniable evidence of what they'd done, evidence that would stand up in court, that would expose the conspiracy, that would bring justice. And I knew exactly where to start. I remembered Christopher had used a private investigator once, Silas Wakefield, about 3 years ago, when Christopher suspected one of his business partners of embezzling funds. Silas had uncovered the truth within a week. Found evidence no one else could find. He was thorough, discreet. And most importantly, he was good at his job. If anyone could uncover the truth about what Betty and Leo had done, it was Silas. If anyone could find the evidence we needed to expose this conspiracy, to bring my children to justice for attempting to murder their father, it was him. I just had to be brave enough to make the call, to set the wheels in motion, to choose truth over comfort. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, found Silas's number in Christopher's old contacts. It was nearly midnight, but this couldn't wait. My husband was in hiding. My children were murderers, and I needed to know how deep this betrayal went. I needed to know who else was involved. I needed to know everything. I took a deep breath and dialed. Silas answered on the third ring, voice gruff with sleep. Wakefield, that one word, professional even at midnight. This was a man who understood urgency, who understood crisis, who would help me find the truth no matter how ugly it was. Silas, I said, voice steadier than I felt. This is Genevieve M.C. Donald. I need your help, and I need you to keep this completely confidential. There was a pause. Then I heard rustling. He was sitting up, paying attention, ready to listen, ready to help. Thank God. Mrs. McDonald, he said carefully. I heard about your husband. I'm very sorry for your loss. His condolences were genuine. He'd liked Christopher, respected him, which made what I was about to tell him even more shocking, even more unbelievable. But he needed to know everything. That's just it, Silas, I said, and I felt tears streaming down my face. Christopher isn't dead. He's alive, and my children tried to murder him. The next morning I met Silas Wakefield at a dingy coffee shop on the outskirts of town, far from anywhere my children or their conspirators might see us. The place smelled like burnt coffee and old grease. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. It was perfect, anonymous, forgettable, safe. Silas was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall. He was a grizzled former detective in his early 60s, with silver hair, weathered skin, and kind eyes that had seen too much. He stood when he saw me, and something in his expression told me he believed me, that he was ready to help. I slid into the booth across from him, hands wrapped around a paper cup of terrible coffee I had no intention of drinking. My stomach was in knots. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. I'd spent the entire night in Christopher's study, staring at my phone, waiting for dawn so I could make this meeting happen. Tell me everything, Silas said quietly, pulling out a small notebook. Start from the beginning, don't leave anything out. His voice was calm, steady, professional. It grounded me, gave me strength. So I told him. The text, the photo, Christopher's call, the attempted murder, everything. Silas listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes. When I finished, he sat back and studied me for a long moment. Mrs. M.C. Donald, he said finally, if your kids did this, they left a trail. Amateurs always do. No matter how smart they think they are, there's always evidence. Always mistakes. We just have to find them." "How long will it take?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. I needed answers, needed proof, needed to know the full scope of what my children had done. Every day Christopher stayed in hiding was another day I had to pretend, had to lie, had to look at my children and act normal. "Give me 48 hours, Silas said. "I have contacts, banks, security companies, public records offices. If there's a conspiracy here, I'll find it." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. "And Mrs. Donald?" "I'm sorry. No parent should ever have to go through this." His compassion nearly broke me, but I held it together. I had to. 48 hours later, Silas called me back to the same coffee shop. This time he had a thick manila folder with him. His expression was grim, dark, like he'd uncovered something far worse than even he'd expected. My heart sank before he even opened his mouth. This was going to be bad, really bad. "I found it," he said simply, sliding the folder across the table. "All of it. And Mrs. Donald, I'm going to be honest with you, this is worse than we thought. This wasn't a moment of anger or desperation. This was planned, calculated, months in the making." His words hit me like physical blows. Months. My children had been planning Christopher's murder for months. He opened the folder and pulled out the first document. Bank statements. "Betty and Leo opened joint accounts 2 months before the incident," he explained, pointing to highlighted sections. "They deposited small amounts at first, trying not to draw attention. But look at this. 3 weeks before the yacht trip, they withdrew $15,000 in cash." "What for?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. My hands were shaking. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. $15,000. What did they need that kind of cash for? What was it used to buy? "I'm still working on that," Silas admitted. "But I have theories. Paying people off, buying equipment, covering tracks." He pulled out another document. "Then there's this, security footage from the marina the morning they left with your husband." He slid a series of printed screenshots across the table. I stared at them, bile rising in my throat. There were Betty and Leo loading supplies onto Christopher's yacht, standard coolers, fishing rods, beach bags. But then Leo carried something else aboard, a large, heavy duffel bag, dark canvas, bulging. He glanced around nervously before hauling it onto the yacht. Betty stood guard, watching, making sure no one was looking too closely. "That's not fishing gear," Silas said flatly. And according to the marina attendant I spoke with, they specifically told him not to help with the bags. Said they had it covered. They didn't want anyone seeing what was inside that duffel. What was in it? Weights to sink Christopher's body, more drugs, evidence they planned to dispose of. My mind spun with horrible possibilities. But Silas wasn't done. He pulled out printed emails next, page after page of correspondence. "These are from Leo's email account," he explained. "I have a contact who was able to access them. Look at the recipients. Look at the subject lines." I looked, and my blood ran cold. Emails between Leo and Jackson Donald, Christopher's own brother. Subject lines like the plan and timeline and after C is gone. The dates went back 6 months. 6 months of planning. 6 months of conspiracy. And Jackson, Christopher's brother, his own flesh and blood, was involved from the beginning. The betrayal was staggering. I clicked through the printed emails with trembling hands. One from Leo to Jackson, he's still refusing to fund the business. We need to move forward with a backup plan. Jackson's response agreed. "I'll talk to Taylor, make sure everyone's on board." Taylor, D. Taylor, Christopher's business partner. He was involved too? How deep did this go? Another email, this one from Betty to the group. "I can handle the medical side. Trust me. It'll look like an accident." My daughter who'd taken an oath to heal people, writing about drugging her father like it was a grocery list, like it was nothing, like his life meant nothing. Each piece of evidence felt like a knife twisting in my gut, I told Silas, tears streaming down my face. My daughter forged signatures. My son planned murder. And they weren't alone. They had help. They had accomplices. This was a conspiracy. The scope of it was overwhelming, suffocating. How many people wanted Christopher dead? "There's more," Silas said gently, and I almost couldn't bear it. How could there possibly be more? But he pulled out one final document. This one made everything else pale in comparison. This was the smoking gun, the proof of premeditation, the evidence we needed. And it made me physically ill. "Life insurance policy," Silas said, sliding it across the table. "Taken out on Christopher 8 weeks before the yacht trip. $5 million. I stared at the paper, vision blurring. $5 million. That's what my husband's life was worth to them. That's the price they'd put on their father. On my husband, on a human being. Who are the beneficiaries? I asked, though I already knew. Already felt it in my bones. This conspiracy was bigger than just Betty and Leo, bigger than I'd imagined, and seeing the names in black and white would make it real. Would make it undeniable. Would shatter what was left of my world. Silas pointed to the list. Betty M.C. Donald, Leo M.C. Donald, Jackson M.C. Donald. Each name was a betrayal, each name a knife in my heart. But he wasn't finished. And D. Taylor, Christopher's business partner of 15 years, the man who'd been at our wedding, who'd held our babies when they were born, who we'd trusted, who Christopher had built an empire with. A traitor. Betty forged Christopher's signature, Silas continued. I had a forensic document examiner look at it. It's a clear forgery. Inconsistent pen pressure, traced lines. She practiced it, but she's not a professional. It'll hold up in court as fraud. My daughter had forged her father's signature on his death warrant, had practiced his handwriting, had planned every detail. Where had I gone wrong? I sat there staring at the insurance policy, and something inside me broke. My daughter forged my husband's signature. My son planned his murder. Christopher's brother, his own blood, betrayed him. His business partner of 15 years sold him out for money. And they weren't alone. They were a team. A conspiracy. 4 people working together to kill one man, to steal everything he'd built. This wasn't just your kids, Mrs. M.C. Donald, Silas said quietly. Christopher's brother Jackson and business partner Taylor were in on it too. They orchestrated everything, the insurance policy, the yacht trip, the cover story, all of it. His voice was heavy with disgust. In his career he'd seen a lot. But family betrayal on this scale? It shook even him. Why, I whispered, why would Jackson and Taylor do this? What did they have to gain? I understood Betty and Leo's twisted logic, inheritance, impatience, greed. But Jackson, Taylor, what motivated them? What made them willing to kill Christopher? What darkness had consumed them too? Silas closed the folder slowly. That's what we need to find out next. Because people don't commit conspiracy to murder without motivation, without something driving them, something desperate. He looked at me with those kind, tired eyes. Are you ready to dig deeper? Because once we uncover their reasons, there's no going back. We'll have to see this through to the end. I thought about Christopher, hiding in a cheap motel room, afraid to come home. I thought about the funeral, the empty casket, the lies. I thought about Betty and Leo smiling at me while plotting murder. I thought about justice, about truth, about making sure they paid for what they'd done, about protecting Christopher and exposing the monsters our family had become. I'm ready, I said firmly, whatever it takes. I want to know everything. Silas had uncovered a full conspiracy, but I needed to understand why Jackson and Taylor would betray us. What did they have to gain? What had turned them into murderers? And how deep did this rabbit hole really go? Over the next 3 days, Silas dug deeper. What he uncovered wasn't just a crime. It was a meticulously planned conspiracy with 4 architects, each with their own dark motivation. When he laid it all out for me in that coffee shop booth, I realized I'd been living among enemies for years. I just hadn't known it. Let's start with Jackson, Silas said, pulling out a thick dossier, Christopher's younger brother, and the resentment goes back decades. He slid several financial documents across the table. While Christopher built a $50 million empire from the ground up, Jackson squandered his entire inheritance in less than 5 years. Bad investments, gambling, failed businesses. He burned through everything. I remembered those years. Christopher had tried to help Jackson, had offered him positions in the company, had given him chance after chance. But Jackson had too much pride to work for his little brother. He'd rather fail on his own than succeed in Christopher's shadow. The resentment festered like an open wound. For the past decade, Jackson's been living off handouts from Christopher, Silas continued. Monthly checks, paid rent, covered debts, and he hated every dollar of it. Hated having to ask, hated being dependent, hated watching Christopher succeed while he failed. Jackson's smile at family dinners had always been tight. Now I understood why. It was masking pure hatred. When Betty approached him about a year ago with an opportunity, he jumped at it, Silas said. She was smart. She knew exactly how to pitch it. Not just money, but revenge. A chance to finally win. To take what Jackson felt should have been his all along. My daughter had weaponized Jackson's jealousy, had turned family dysfunction into murder. It was diabolical. And Taylor? I asked, voice hoarse. Dee Taylor had been Christopher's business partner for 15 years. They'd built the company together, grown it from nothing. Taylor had been like family. He'd been at our anniversary parties, our children's graduations. How could he betray Christopher like this? What could possibly motivate that level of treachery? Silas's expression darkened. Taylor's been embezzling from the company for the past 8 months, he said, sliding more documents across the table. Bank transfers, altered invoices, fake vendor accounts, small amounts at first, a few thousand here and there, but it escalated. By the time Christopher started noticing discrepancies, Taylor had stolen over $2 million. My hands flew to my mouth. $2 million. Christopher had mentioned finding irregularities in the books about 3 months ago. He'd been concerned but not suspicious. He'd trusted Taylor, had assumed it was accounting errors, had planned a routine audit. He'd never imagined his partner was robbing him blind. Christopher noticed the discrepancies and scheduled a full audit for 2 weeks after the yacht trip, Silas explained. Taylor knew he'd be exposed. Knew he'd go to prison. This was his only way out. Kill Christopher. Take control of the company before the audit could happen, and bury the evidence of his theft forever. It wasn't just greed, it was desperation, a cornered rat fighting for survival. So they all had something to gain, I said, the picture becoming sickeningly clear. Betty and Leo wanted inheritance and control. Jackson wanted revenge and money. Taylor wanted to cover up his crimes and save himself from prison. 4 people, 4 motivations, 1 victim. My husband. The man who'd built everything they wanted to steal. Silas nodded, and they coordinated everything. This is where it gets truly calculated. He laid out a timeline on the table, a detailed breakdown of how the conspiracy unfolded, each step planned, each role assigned, each person knowing exactly what they had to do. It read like a military operation, cold, efficient, heartless. Taylor convinced Christopher to take the kids cruising, Silas began, pointing to the first entry on the timeline. He did it during a business meeting about 2 weeks before the trip, planted the idea. Said Christopher seemed stressed, suggested family time might help. Christopher trusted him completely. Never suspected Taylor was setting him up for murder. The manipulation was breathtaking, using Christopher's love for his family as the weapon against him. Betty procured the sedatives, Silas continued. She used her nursing credentials to access pharmaceutical supplies, signed them out under false pretenses. She knew exactly what dosage would incapacitate Christopher without killing him immediately. She needed him conscious enough to be pushed overboard. Needed it to look like an accident, not a poisoning. My daughter's medical knowledge became a tool for murder. She'd perverted everything she'd learned about healing to kill. Betty also forged all the insurance documents, Silas added. She had access to Christopher's home office, stole his signature stamp, practiced his handwriting for weeks. The insurance application, the beneficiary forms, everything. She even bribed a notary named Marcus Flynn to backdate the documents and make them appear legitimate. Every signature, every form, a complete fraud. And she'd done it all under our roof, while smiling at us over breakfast. Leo executed the physical attack, Silas said, voice heavy with disgust. He was the muscle, the one who actually pushed Christopher overboard. The others needed someone willing to get their hands dirty. Leo was angry enough, bitter enough, entitled enough. He didn't hesitate. My son, My baby boy. The child I'd rocked to sleep, the one who'd cried in my arms after his first heartbreak. That person was gone. A stranger had taken his place. And Jackson created the cover story, Silas finished. He fabricated witness statements from fake boaters who supposedly saw Christopher fall. He coached Betty and Leo on what to tell the Coast Guard, what to tell the police, what to tell you. He made sure all their stories aligned perfectly, that there were no contradictions, no holes in the narrative. Jackson had orchestrated the lie, had made sure everyone believed Christopher drowned, had helped my children deceive me, his own sister-in-law. The goal was simple, Silas said, pulling out one final document, a proposed business restructuring plan dated just 2 days after Christopher's supposed death. Split Christopher's assets 4 ways. Betty and Leo would take control of the family businesses and properties. Jackson would get a vice president position with a massive salary. Taylor would remain as managing partner and continue embezzling without oversight. Everyone wins, except Christopher and you. I stared at the business plan, and something cold settled in my chest. These people smiled at me at the funeral, I said, voice flat, hugged me, told me they'd help with arrangements. Jackson gave the eulogy. Taylor cried at the podium, and the whole time they were dividing up the spoils, planning how to spend Christopher's money, celebrating his death. The hypocrisy, the cruelty. It was inhuman. They thought they'd gotten away with it, Silas said. They thought Christopher was dead, that there was no body to examine, no evidence of foul play, just a tragic accident. They'd planned everything perfectly, or so they believed. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated Christopher's will to survive, his strength, his determination to expose them. I felt something shift inside me. The grief, the guilt, the maternal instinct to protect my children, it all burned away. What remained was cold, pure fury. These people had tried to murder my husband, had traumatized him, had made me grieve, had lied to my face, and they'd done it all for money, for greed, for power. They deserved no mercy. I knew who was behind it now, I said to Silas, my voice steel. But we needed more, didn't we? We needed the forged documents, the physical evidence. The proof they couldn't deny or explain away. Knowing the truth wasn't enough. We needed to prove it, to expose them, to make sure they paid for every single thing they'd done. Silas nodded slowly. Getting that evidence means taking risks. It means you playing a role. Pretending you suspect nothing while we gather what we need. Can you do that? Can you look your children in the eye, knowing what they did, and smile? It would be the hardest thing I'd ever done. But for Christopher, for justice, I could do anything. Yes, I said without hesitation. Tell me what you need me to do. The investigation was just beginning. But now we had the full picture. Now we understood the web of betrayal. Now we knew exactly who our enemies were, and we were going to take them all down, every single one of them. Silas didn't stop with the insurance policy. Over the next week, he dug deeper into the paper trail, and what he uncovered made my blood run cold. Betty hadn't just forged one document. She'd been systematically forging paperwork for months, creating an entire alternate reality on paper, planning not just Christopher's death but our complete destruction. Look at this, Silas said during our next meeting, spreading documents across the table like evidence at a crime scene. Power of attorney documents, dated 4 months ago, giving Betty full medical decision-making authority over Christopher in the event he became incapacitated. He looked at me grimly. She was planning for every scenario. If Christopher survived the attack but was brain damaged or in a coma, she'd have legal authority to pull the plug. I felt sick. My daughter had planned her father's murder so thoroughly that she'd even prepared for the possibility he might survive. She'd given herself the legal right to finish the job if drowning didn't work, to disconnect life support, to kill him in a hospital bed if the water didn't kill him first. The calculation was monstrous. There's more, Silas continued, pulling out another document, an updated will, also backdated 4 months. This one names Betty and Leo as sole beneficiaries of Christopher's entire estate. He paused, letting that sink in. Gina, you're not mentioned anywhere in this will. You get nothing. They cut you out completely. They'd planned to take everything, not just Christopher's life, but my life too. My security, my future, everything. I stared at the forged will, hands trembling. They were going to leave me with nothing, I whispered. After 30 years of marriage, after building that life together, they were going to throw me out like garbage. The cruelty took my breath away. This wasn't just about killing Christopher, it was about erasing me too, making me disappear. Business transfer documents, Silas said, adding another stack to the pile. These shift complete ownership of McDonald Enterprises to the children immediately upon Christopher's death. No probate, no waiting period. They'd have taken control of the company within days, before anyone could question anything, before any lawyers could review the paperwork too carefully. Speed had been essential to their plan. Strike fast, take everything, bury the evidence. Can you believe a daughter would do this? Hit that like button if you're as shocked as I was. Because I'm telling you, seeing these documents, seeing the extent of Betty's fraud, it destroyed any remaining hope I had that my children might somehow be redeemable. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was months of deliberate, calculated evil. How did she do it? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know, didn't want to picture my daughter creeping through our home, stealing, forging, plotting. But I needed to understand, needed to know exactly how she'd betrayed us. Every detail mattered. Every piece of evidence would be needed later. Silas pulled out photographs, surveillance images from inside our own home. I installed hidden cameras in Christopher's study after we started investigating, he explained. I needed to see if anyone was still accessing his files. And I caught her. He slid the photos toward me. Betty, in Christopher's study, rifling through his desk, late at night, when she thought I was asleep. She stole Christopher's signature stamp from his desk, Silas explained, pointing to one image. See here? She's holding it up to the light, examining it. She took it home and used it to practice, to create templates. The image showed my daughter's face, concentrated, focused, completely devoid of guilt or remorse. She looked like a forger, a criminal. Not my baby girl. She practiced his handwriting for weeks, Silas continued. I found notebooks in her apartment, pages and pages of Christopher's signature. She traced it, copied it, perfected it. He showed me photos of the notebooks, hundreds of signatures. Christopher's name written over and over. My daughter's handwriting slowly morphing to match her father's. It was obsessive, disturbing, the work of someone completely consumed by their plan. She even bribed a notary, Silas said, disgust clear in his voice. Marcus Flynn, a struggling notary with gambling debts. She paid him $20,000 to backdate documents and authenticate her forgeries. He notarized everything without verifying Christopher's identity, made it all look legitimate, official, legal, another conspirator, another person willing to help murder my husband for money. I thought about Betty in our home, at our dinner table, smiling, asking about Christopher's day, hugging me goodnight. And all the while she was planning this, rifling through our private papers, stealing Christopher's identity, forging documents that would steal everything we'd built. My daughter had violated our home, our trust, our lives, while pretending to care. My daughter rifled through our home, our private papers, planning our destruction while sitting at our dinner table, I said, voice shaking with rage. Smiling, pretending to care. Asking Christopher about his business meeting so she'd know what to forge. Asking about his health so she'd know how to plan the attack. Every conversation had been reconnaissance. Every hug a lie. Every family dinner a performance. Silas nodded sympathetically. I know this is hard, but we needed to document everything, to prove premeditation, to show this wasn't impulsive, it was calculated. He pulled out one final set of documents. I also had a forensic document examiner analyze all the signatures. The report is damning. He slid the analysis toward me, technical language, graphs, comparisons. But the conclusion was clear, forgery. Look at these comparisons, Silas said, pointing to side-by-side signature images. Christopher's real signature has consistent pen pressure. He signs quickly, confidently. Betty's forgeries show hesitation marks, places where she stopped and started, where she traced. The pen pressure is inconsistent, light in some areas, heavy in others. She was being careful, too careful. You could see the difference once it was pointed out. The forgeries looked stiff, artificial, practiced. There are also inconsistencies in the date formats, Silas continued. Christopher always writes dates as month, day, year. Always. But Betty used day, month, year in several documents, a European format Christopher never used. Small details. But they matter. The devil was in the details, and Betty, for all her planning, had made mistakes, tiny cracks in her perfect crime that would bring the whole conspiracy crashing down. Christopher's handwriting also slants slightly to the right, Silas explained, showing me samples. Betty overcorrected and made hers too vertical. She was trying so hard to match his style that she overcompensated. A real signature is natural, fluid. These are mechanical, traced, forged. Each flaw in her forgeries was another piece of evidence, another nail in her coffin. And she'd never suspected anyone would look this closely. I sat there surrounded by evidence of my daughter's betrayal. Each forged document was another knife in my heart, another betrayal, another violation. She'd stolen her father's identity, cut her mother out of existence on paper, planned to take everything we'd built, and she'd done it all with cold, calculated precision. This wasn't my daughter, this was a stranger, a criminal, a monster. Silas looked at me seriously. "We have enough for the police now," he said. "Fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit murder. They'll all go to prison. We can end this today." His hand was on his phone, ready to call, ready to have them arrested, to bring this nightmare to an end. Justice was within reach. I just had to say the word, but I didn't want them arrested, not yet. I wanted them to confess. I wanted them to admit what they'd done. I wanted them to feel the terror Christopher felt drowning in that water. I wanted them to understand, truly understand, what they'd done, what they'd destroyed, what they'd lost. Arrest would come. But first they needed to face us, face the truth, face the consequences of their evil. "Not yet," I said, voice cold and steady. "I want to confront them first. I want them to confess. I want to see their faces when they realize Christopher is alive, that we know everything, that their perfect plan failed." Silas studied me for a long moment, then slowly he nodded. He understood. Sometimes justice isn't just about punishment, it's about truth, about making the guilty face what they've done. "Then we need to plan this carefully," Silas said. "We need to set a trap they can't escape. Record everything, get their confession on camera, make it undeniable." His mind was already working, already strategizing, and I was ready to face my children one final time, ready to watch their world fall apart, ready to deliver the justice Christopher deserved. Silas and I spent 3 days planning every detail. We turned Christopher's study into a surveillance room, hidden cameras in the bookshelves, microphones disguised as desk accessories, recording equipment that would capture every word, every expression, every confession. This had to be perfect, one chance, one trap, and they had to walk right into it. "The key is making them feel safe," Silas explained as we positioned the final camera, confident, like they've already won. "That's when people get careless. That's when they say things they shouldn't." He adjusted the angle slightly. "We need them bragging, celebrating, incriminating themselves beyond any shadow of doubt. Every word they spoke would seal their fate. They just didn't know it yet." We created a fake will, a document that looked completely legitimate, with official letterhead, proper legal language, notary stamps. But the contents were designed to enrage them, to shatter their expectations, to make them drop their masks and reveal the monsters underneath. Christopher left everything to me, the house, the businesses, the investments. Betty and Leo got small trust funds, $25,000 each, barely enough to cover a year's rent. "They'll explode," I told Silas. "They've been waiting for millions. They killed for millions. And when they think they're getting pennies, they'll lose control." I knew my children, knew their entitlement, knew their greed. They wouldn't be able to hide their rage. Their disappointment would override their caution. And they'd confess. They wouldn't be able to help themselves. Silas arranged for 2 police detectives to wait in an unmarked van outside, close enough to intervene if things got dangerous, but hidden enough that the conspirators wouldn't suspect anything. "Once we have the confession on tape, they'll come in and make the arrests," Silas explained. Clean, quick, no escape. Justice was coming. I could almost taste it. The anticipation was overwhelming. I called each of them personally, kept my voice steady. grief-stricken, the grieving widow handling difficult business. "We need to settle Christopher's estate," I told Betty. "The lawyer is coming tomorrow. 2:00. Please be there." She tried to sound somber, but I heard the excitement in her voice, the eagerness. She thought she was about to become rich. She had no idea what was coming. Leo barely pretended to care. Finally, he'd said, "It's been weeks, Mom. We need to move forward, move forward." Like his father's death was an inconvenience, like he couldn't wait to cash in. The callousness made my skin crawl. But I kept my voice level, kept playing my role, just a little longer, just one more performance. I called Jackson and Taylor, too. "Family should be there," I told Jackson, voice sweet. "Christopher would have wanted you involved." Jackson had agreed immediately, probably already calculating his share. And Taylor, ever the concerned business partner, had said, "Of course, Gina. Anything you need, anything except loyalty, anything except honesty, anything except not murdering his partner." But I smiled into the phone and thanked him. The day arrived. I dressed carefully. Black dress, pearls, the picture of elegant grief. I arrived at the mansion early, checked every camera, every microphone, made sure everything was working. Silas arrived dressed as an estate lawyer, expensive suit, briefcase, perfectly styled gray hair. He looked exactly like what they'd expect. Professional, authoritative, trustworthy. They'd never suspect. Betty and Leo arrived first, together, always together now. Betty wore a designer black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, Chanel if I had to guess. Her makeup was perfect, hairstyled. She looked like she was going to a cocktail party, not a will reading. Leo wore an expensive suit, Italian, custom-tailored. They barely tried to hide their excitement. Their eyes gleamed with anticipation, with greed. Jackson came next in his own expensive suit, probably bought on credit, knowing his financial situation. But he wanted to look successful, wanted to look like he deserved what he was about to receive. His smile was confident, smug. He hugged me, actually hugged me, and whispered, "Christopher would be proud of how you're handling this." I wanted to vomit. Instead, I smiled and thanked him. Taylor arrived last, confident smile plastered on his face. "Gina," he said warmly, taking my hands. "How are you holding up?" Such concern, such compassion. The performance was Oscar-worthy. If I didn't know he'd helped orchestrate my husband's murder, I might have believed him. But I saw through it now, saw the calculation behind his eyes, the relief that Christopher was gone, the anticipation of profit. We gathered in Christopher's study. I sat in the corner playing the grieving widow. Silas sat behind Christopher's desk, briefcase open, fake will in hand. Betty and Leo sat together on the leather sofa, barely able to sit still. Jackson took the armchair. Taylor stood by the window, trying to look contemplative, but I saw him checking his watch, eager for this to be over, eager to claim his prize. Silas began reading the will in a dry, lawyer-like monotone. I, Christopher M.C. Donald, being of sound mind and body, standard legal language. Betty's leg bounced with impatience. Leo poured himself champagne from the bar. Champagne at a will reading, I noted with disgust. They couldn't even pretend to mourn for an hour. Then Silas got to the relevant part. I leave the entirety of my estate, including all business holdings, properties, investments, and assets, to my beloved wife, Genevieve M.C. Donald. He paused. Let it sink in. To my children, Betty and Leo, I leave trust funds of $25,000 each, to be distributed upon their 30th birthdays. Silence. Complete, shocked silence. I watched their faces carefully. This was the moment. This was when the masks would crack. Betty's face went white, then red, then purple. "That's impossible!" she shouted, jumping to her feet. She stopped herself, caught herself. But the damage was done. The slip was revealing. "We what, Betty? We planned differently? We forged different documents? We killed him for more than this?" "Finish your sentence, daughter." Leo didn't have Betty's self-control. He was already drunk on champagne and arrogance. "This is bullshit," he yelled, slamming his glass down. "The old man is dead. We made sure of it. We did everything right. This can't be real. We made sure of it." Those 4 words. Confession, admission, recorded, preserved, undeniable. My son had just confessed to murder. Jackson's face had gone pale. He was trying to quiet Leo, grabbing his arm, hissing at him to shut up. But it was too late. The dam had broken. Taylor was panicking too, backing toward the door. "We had a plan," Taylor said, voice rising. "We all agreed. The insurance money alone was $5 million. Where's the insurance money?" He'd just admitted his role too. They were all unraveling, all confessing, all destroying themselves. "What insurance money?" Silas asked calmly, playing his role perfectly. "There's no insurance policy listed in Mr. McDonald's estate documents." He looked at them with staged confusion. "Perhaps you're mistaken?" The trap was closing. They could feel it. But they couldn't stop themselves, couldn't control their rage. Their greed had consumed them so completely that they'd lost all self-preservation. "The policy Betty forged," Leo shouted. $5 million. We're all supposed to get a share. That was the deal." He was so angry, so drunk, so entitled, that he didn't even realize what he was saying. Didn't realize he was confessing everything. Admitting to fraud, to conspiracy, to murder. All on camera, all recorded, all admissible in court. Betty tried to salvage it. "Leo, shut up. Just shut up." But her panic betrayed her. If they were innocent, why would she be panicking? Why would she need Leo to be quiet? Innocent people don't panic when wills are read. Innocent people don't tell each other to shut up. Guilty people do, guilty people who realize their perfect plan is falling apart. That's when I stepped out from behind the curtain where I'd been watching, where I'd been recording, where I'd been waiting for this exact moment. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me, and the expressions on their faces, shock, horror, dawning realization, it was almost worth the pain they'd caused. Almost. "You're right, Leo," I said, voice cold and steady. "You made sure of it. You drugged your father, threw him overboard, left him to die in freezing water. And Betty, you forged documents, you stole his signature, you planned every detail for months." I walked toward them slowly. "Jackson, you created fake witness statements, coached them on their lies. And Taylor, you embezzled millions and used Christopher's murder to cover your crimes. And I have proof of everything," I continued. "Every forged document, every email, every bank transaction, the insurance fraud, the conspiracy, all of it, recorded, documented, undeniable." I smiled at them, a cold, vengeful smile. "Did you really think you'd get away with it?" Their faces drained of color. Betty swayed like she might faint. Leo's mouth hung open, goldfish-like. Jackson had frozen completely. And Taylor bolted for the door. But Silas was faster. He blocked the exit. "I wouldn't do that, Mr. Taylor," he said calmly. "There's nowhere to run." Jackson lunged toward me then, rage overriding fear. His hands reached for my throat. But Silas intervened, tackling Jackson to the ground. "You bitch!" Jackson screamed. "You ruined everything! We had it perfect!" Yes, they had it perfect. Until they underestimated me, until they underestimated Christopher's will to survive. Betty was crying now, mascara streaming down her face. "Mom, please, you don't understand. We didn't mean for it to go this far, we just—" But I held up my hand, cutting her off. "Don't," I said flatly. "Don't lie to me anymore. I know exactly what you meant to do. I know everything." She crumpled, sobbing, not from remorse, but from being caught, from losing, from realizing she'd destroyed her life for nothing. Leo said nothing, just stared at the floor. The fight had drained out of him. He looked small suddenly, young, like the boy he used to be before greed poisoned him. But I felt no sympathy. He'd murdered his father, planned it, executed it, celebrated it. Whatever child he'd once been was gone forever. A murderer had taken his place, and then the police walked in. The police stormed Christopher's study like a tactical team. 2 detectives in plain clothes, 4 uniformed officers behind them. They'd been listening to every word from the van outside, heard every confession, every admission of guilt, every piece of evidence we needed. Now they were here to finish it, to deliver justice, to end this nightmare once and for all. Betty, MC Donald, Leo, MC Donald, Jackson, MC Donald, D. Taylor, you're all under arrest, Detective Sarah Morrison announced, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. She was a tall woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. She began reading them their rights as officers moved in with handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." The charges came rapid fire, each one a hammer blow. Attempted murder, fraud and forgery, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder. For Taylor specifically, embezzlement of over $2 million. Each charge carried years in prison, decades. They would be old when they got out, if they ever got out. Their lives as they knew them were over. Betty started screaming, not crying, screaming, a primal, desperate sound that echoed off the walls. "Mom, please. We're your children. You can't do this to us. We're family." Mascara streamed down her face in black rivers. Her carefully styled hair had come loose. She looked wild, unhinged, desperate. She reached for me as an officer cuffed her wrists behind her back. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. This woman had my daughter's face, my daughter's voice. But she wasn't Betty, not the Betty I'd raised, not the compassionate girl who'd wanted to heal people. That person was gone, had been gone for a long time, and I'd been too blind to see it, too desperate to believe my children were still good. "You stopped being my children the moment you left your father to drown," I said, voice steady despite my breaking heart. "You're strangers to me now." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but they were true. Every syllable. These people had murdered my husband, forged documents, planned my destruction. They weren't my children. They were criminals, monsters wearing familiar faces. Betty's screams intensified. "You're supposed to protect us. You're our mother. How can you do this?" She was thrashing now, fighting the officer trying to cuff her. "We did this for our future, for our freedom. Dad was never going to let us live our own lives." Still making excuses. Still blaming Christopher. Still refusing to take responsibility. Still believing she was the victim. Leo said nothing. Absolutely nothing. He just stared at the floor as they cuffed him, face blank, eyes empty. I think in that moment he finally understood. Finally realized the magnitude of what he'd done, what he'd lost, what he'd destroyed. His silence was somehow more devastating than Betty's screams, because it meant the reality had finally penetrated, and there was nothing left to say. Jackson was still screaming threats. "You'll regret this, Gina. I'll destroy you. I'll make sure you lose everything." The officers had to forcibly restrain him. He lunged at me again, and it took 2 officers to hold him back. Christopher stole everything from me. Everything. He deserved what he got. He deserved worse. The bitterness, the hatred. It poured out of him like poison. This was what decades of jealousy looked like, what resentment became when left to fester. Taylor had gone completely silent, too, but unlike Leo's realization, Taylor's silence was calculation. His mind was already working, already thinking about lawyers, about defenses, about how to minimize his sentence. He was a businessman to the end, always strategizing, always looking for the angle, always trying to save himself. Even now, even caught red-handed, he couldn't stop scheming. The officers led them out one by one. Betty first, still screaming. Then Leo, head down, shuffling like a condemned man. Jackson fighting every step. Taylor walking calmly, already detached, already planning his defense. I watched them leave Christopher's study, the room where so many family memories had been made, now the scene of their final betrayal, their last moment as free people. The media descended within hours. Someone at the police station had leaked it, probably inevitably. By evening, news vans lined the street outside our mansion, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, headlines scrolling across television screens. Family conspiracy, children accused of attempted murder, yacht betrayal, businessman survives children's murder plot, McDonald fortune, greed, forgery, and family destruction. Our private nightmare became public spectacle. Our family name became synonymous with betrayal. The notary, Marcus Flynn, was arrested that same day, charged as an accessory to fraud. He'd taken Betty's $20,000 bribe to authenticate forged documents, to make murder look legitimate. He confessed immediately, hoping for a plea deal. Gave investigators everything: dates, amounts, conversations. He threw Betty under the bus without hesitation. Honor among criminals, it seemed, was a myth. Everyone saved themselves when the ship started sinking. Hundreds of miles away, Christopher sat in Earl's small cabin watching the news coverage. Earl told me later that Christopher wept, not from relief that justice was coming, not from anger at his children, but from grief, pure, overwhelming grief for the family that no longer existed, for the children he'd loved who'd tried to kill him, for the life we'd built that was now destroyed. Earl said Christopher cried for hours, and there was nothing anyone could do to comfort him. I sat alone in the mansion that night after the police left, after the media frenzy died down, after Silas went home. The house was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. I walked through rooms that had once been filled with laughter, with family dinners, with Christmas mornings and birthday parties. Now they felt like a tomb, a monument to everything we'd lost, everything that could never be repaired. I did the right thing. I knew I did. Christopher was alive because I'd fought for the truth. Justice was being served because I'd refused to protect my children's lies. The conspiracy had been exposed. The criminals would pay for their crimes. I'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over family, right over wrong. I'd made the only choice I could make, the only choice a decent person would make. So why did it feel like I'd lost everything? Why did this victory taste like ashes? Why did doing the right thing hurt so much? I sat in Christopher's chair behind his desk and cried for my children, cried for my husband, cried for the family that once existed and would never exist again, cried for the innocence lost, for the trust destroyed, for the love that had turned to poison. Justice had been served, but the cost was everything I held dear, and I wasn't sure if that made me strong or if it just made me alone. 2 months later, the trial began. The courthouse was a zoo, media everywhere, protesters holding signs, curious onlookers hoping to catch a glimpse of the family that had shocked the nation. The yacht betrayal trial, they were calling it. Our family tragedy had become entertainment. Our private pain had become public spectacle. I walked through the crowds with my head held high, refusing to hide, refusing to be ashamed of seeking justice. The prosecution's case was devastating. They presented everything, every piece of evidence Silas and I had gathered, every confession recorded in Christopher's study, every forged document with forensic analysis proving Betty's fraud. The jury sat transfixed as the prosecutor laid out the conspiracy piece by piece, month by month, decision by decision, until the full picture emerged of 4 people systematically planning murder. Security footage from the marina played on large screens. The jury watched Leo carry that suspicious duffel bag onto the yacht, watched him glance around nervously, watched Betty stand guard. The prosecutor asked, "Does this look like a family preparing for a pleasant day of bonding?" Nobody in that courtroom thought it did. It looked exactly like what it was: preparation for murder. Email chains between the conspirators were read aloud. "Leo to Jackson, he's refusing to fund the business. We need the backup plan." Jackson to Taylor, "Everyone on board?" Taylor's response, "Let's do this." Betty's chilling contribution, "I can handle the medical side, trust me." Each email was another nail in their coffins, each word proving premeditation, proving conspiracy, proving guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. The life insurance policy was presented, $5 million, Betty's forged signature, 4 beneficiaries, who all sat in the defendant's chairs. The forensic document examiner testified for an hour, showing slide after slide of signature comparisons, pointing out every flaw in Betty's forgeries. "This is not Christopher M.C. Donald's signature," he said definitively. "This is a traced imitation by someone who practiced extensively but lacked professional skill." Betty stared at her hands. Couldn't even look at the evidence of her crime. But the most damning evidence was the hidden camera footage from the mansion. The jury watched Betty explode, watched Leo confess, watched Taylor panic, watched Jackson try to attack me. "The old man is dead, we made sure of it." Leo's words echoed through the silent courtroom. His own voice, his own confession, undeniable, irrefutable, condemning. Several jurors visibly recoiled. One woman covered her mouth in shock. The testimonies began. Earl Hutchins took the stand first. a humble fisherman in an ill-fitting suit, clearly uncomfortable in the courtroom but determined to tell the truth. He described finding Christopher on the shore. Thought he was dead at first, Earl said quietly, barely breathing, lips blue, hypothermic. I got him to my cabin. Warmed him up. Fed him. Didn't know who he was. Just knew he needed help. The jury listened, rapt. Earl's simple decency was a stark contrast to the defendant's calculated cruelty. Silas Wakefield presented his investigation findings. Every document traced, every transaction followed, every lie exposed. He was professional, thorough, unshakable under cross-examination. When Betty's lawyer tried to discredit him, Silas calmly produced more evidence, more proof, more documentation. The defense had nothing, because the truth was airtight. The conspiracy was documented. The guilt was undeniable. There was no defense except the indefensible. Then it was my turn. I took the stand with shaking hands but a steady voice. I testified about the text message that shattered my world, about Christopher's call, about discovering the conspiracy, about the forged documents in my own home, about watching my children plot their father's murder while smiling at family dinners. I looked at Betty and Leo as I spoke. They couldn't meet my eyes, couldn't face what they'd done, couldn't confront the mother they'd betrayed. And then Christopher walked into the courtroom, his first public appearance since his supposed death. The gasps were audible, media cameras flashed despite the judge's orders. Betty gasped, hand flying to her mouth. Leo's face crumbled. Jackson looked away, unable to face his brother. Taylor buried his head in his hands. Christopher walked slowly to the witness stand, thinner than before, grayer but alive. Undeniably, impossibly alive. Their perfect murder had failed, and now he was here to condemn them. Christopher's testimony was quiet but powerful. He described the drugging, the confrontation, the moment Leo pushed him overboard. I looked into my son's eyes as he shoved me into the water, Christopher said, voice breaking. And there was nothing there. No love, no hesitation, no remorse, just cold calculation. Several jurors wiped tears. The judge looked grim. And my children just sat there, frozen, guilty, defeated, exposed for the monsters they'd become. Betty's defense was pathetic. Her lawyer claimed she'd been influenced by Leo and Jackson, that she was a vulnerable young woman manipulated by stronger personalities, that she'd never wanted to hurt anyone. But the prosecution destroyed that argument, showed Betty's emails, her forged documents, her purchase of sedatives, her cold calculation. Does this look like someone being manipulated? The prosecutor asked, holding up Betty's meticulous forgeries. Or does this look like a mastermind? The jury's expressions answered clearly. Betty was no victim. She was an architect of murder. If this story has moved you, please subscribe. The ending will stay with you. Because what happened next, the verdicts, the sentencing, the final reckoning, it changed everything. It ended one chapter of our lives and began another, and the weight of those verdicts would echo for the rest of our days. Justice was coming, but justice, I was learning, doesn't heal wounds. It only closes them. The scars remain forever. The verdicts came after 3 days of deliberation. Guilty, on all counts. For all defendants. Betty, 25 years for attempted murder and fraud. Leo, 30 years for attempted murder and assault. Jackson, 20 years for conspiracy and fraud. Taylor, 15 years for conspiracy and embezzlement. The sentences were read one by one. Each defendant stood as the judge pronounced their fate. Each one had stolen years from Christopher's life. Now years would be stolen from theirs. The symmetry was almost poetic, almost fair. I watched them being led away in handcuffs. Betty was crying again, still crying, always crying, but never from remorse, only from self-pity, only from losing. Leo walked like a man in a trance, finally understanding what he'd destroyed. Jackson was still bitter, still angry, still blaming everyone but himself. And Taylor, ever the pragmatist, was already discussing appeals with his lawyer. Even in defeat, he was strategizing. Even in prison, he'd keep scheming. Some people never change. I felt no satisfaction watching them led away, no triumph, no vindication. Just profound sadness for the children I thought I raised, for the family that no longer existed, for the innocence lost, for the trust destroyed, for everything that could have been but never would be. Justice had been served, the guilty were punished, Christopher was safe, but victory tasted like ashes, and I wondered if the cost of truth was always this high, if doing what's right always hurts this much.